Have you ever had a moment where something just didn't sit right with you? Just that quiet feeling that something about a situation just does not make sense. Even when everything around you is telling you that it did make sense. It did. I swear it did. Because we're taught to trust systems, right? Trust the computers, trust the data. And in today's story, trust the procedures designed by people that are way smarter than us. But what happens when the system is completely certain and you aren't? In 1983, one man found himself exactly in that position, sitting inside of a Soviet military bunker while a computer calmly informed him that nuclear missiles were already on their way to his location. The alarms were correct, the protocol was clear, and the chain of command was waiting, just waiting for that call to counterstrike. All he had to do was report what the new system told him, and history might have unfolded a lot differently. Hello everybody, my name is Mavis Shahar, and if you enjoy dark history, the human condition, and stories that, might make you question everything, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button for me. I'd be glad to have you. But today we are talking about someone near and dear to my heart, Stanislav Petrov, aka the guy who saved the frickin' world. Though for most of his life, nobody knew that he did anything at all. But by the end of the story, I want us to come back to a question. Okay? What do you do when certainty itself starts feeling wrong, but it's certain? Now, before we get into Petrov himself, we need to talk about the world that he was living in, because this didn't just happen. It wasn't just an isolated incident. By the early 1980s, the Cold War wasn't just political tension anymore. It was a lot of psychological warfare. The United States and the Soviet Union had spent decades locked in an arms race. We all learned about it in school. Each building enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet several times over. And neither side trusted the other to hesitate just for a moment. Every military exercise looked like preparation for an invasion. Every technological advancement looked like a threat. Fear had become the new policy. And just a few weeks before that night we're about to talk about, something else happened that made tensions even worse. A Korean civilian passenger plane accidentally entered the Soviet airspace. Soviet forces believed it might be a spy aircraft, and they shot it down. 269 civilians were killed. From the Soviet perspective, the West looked aggressive and unpredictable, and from the Western perspective, the Soviet Union looked dangerous and incredibly paranoid. Nobody believed the other side would stay calm forever, though. So both nations began preparing for the worst-case scenario. Not someday, but at any moment. And this is where we arrive at one of the most unsettling ideas humanity has honestly ever created, in my opinion. MAD. Or mutually assured destruction. The logic was terrifyingly simple for the time. If one country launched nuclear weapons, the other would immediately launch theirs in response. Both nations would be destroyed, along with a lot of the world too. But strangely enough, that threat was supposed to keep the peace. Because if nobody could survive a nuclear war, nobody would start one, right? But there was a problem. Retaliation had to be fast. Too slow and your missiles could be destroyed before you even had a chance to launch them. So both sides built things called early warning systems designed to detect incoming attacks within minutes. Not hours, just minutes. Which meant decisions about the survival of civilization might need to be made before anyone even knew what was happening. And that brings us back to one ordinary night shift and one officer sitting in front of a screen. The man at the center of the story is not some high-ranking official or political figure whose name you'd expect to find in the history books. Stanislav Petrov was pretty ordinary by military standards. He was born September 7, 1939, and he saved the world in 1983 when he was 44 years old. He was trained as an engineer, which is actually kind of important here because his job really wasn't about combat. It was about systems. Understanding how they worked, how information moved through them, and more importantly, where they could fail. He was stationed at a highly classified early warning facility just outside of Moscow called, forgive me if I fuck this up, Serpukhov 15. And his responsibilities sound simple when you say it out loud. He monitored satellite systems designed to detect whether the United States had launched nuclear missiles towards the Soviet Union. That was it. Just keep an eye on the sky. If the system detected a launch, the report would go up the chain of command and leadership would decide what to do next. Very procedural, very structured, very dependent on trust. Trust in technology, trust in protocol, and trust that the system would work exactly the way that it was supposed to. And for a long time it did. They didn't really have a lot of problems with it. Until one night, they did have a problem. Shortly after midnight on September 26th of 1983, the warning system suddenly activated. Alarms began sounding throughout the control room, and the computer displayed something no one ever wanted to see: a confirmed missile launch from the United States. Now imagine sitting there and seeing that information appear in front of you. Not as speculation, not as rumor, but as official system data. Then almost immediately, another alert appeared, and another, and another. And within moments, the system reported 5 incoming nuclear missiles. The screens were flashing, the alarms were loud, they were blaring, and protocol was very clear about what had to come next. Petrov was supposed to report the attack immediately because under the Civil War doctrine, hesitation could mean losing the ability to respond at all. And this is where the situation becomes almost too stressful to think about. Like, I would have folded like a fucking lawn chair. I would have folded so quick. Anyways, at that exact moment, there was no way to fully confirm whether the missiles were real or an error. Ground radar couldn't see them yet because they were still traveling beyond detection range. So, the computer's satellite warning was the only information that was available to them. The system was certain, but Petrov was not. Now, this is the part where some people simplified it and simply said that he trusted his gut. No. That explanation, in my opinion, misses what makes this moment so big and, important and ultimately human. Petrov didn't suddenly have a heroic feeling or a dramatic moment of rebellion. Instead, he started thinking through the situation the way someone trained in system analysis could. 5 missiles did not make strategic sense. If the United States were to truly launch the first strike, the goal would be to eliminate retaliation completely, which would likely involve hundreds of missiles, not just a handful. And on top of that, the satellite system itself was relatively new, and engineers already knew that it wasn't perfect. It had plenty of flaws. So he found himself in a situation where the data said one thing, but his understanding of reality and his training said another. Later in life, Petrov admitted that he wasn't confident at all. He described his certainty as basically 50-50, which is honestly so real. But it's what makes this decision so terrifying. He didn't know what was right. He just knew the situation didn't fully make sense. So instead of reporting a confirmed attack, he reported a false alarm. And then he waited for several minutes. And he genuinely believed he might have made the worst mistake in human history. That had to have been the longest minutes ever. Eventually, investigators discovered what had actually caused the alert. It was a rare alignment of sunlight reflecting off of high-altitude clouds, and it had confused the satellite sensors, creating patterns that the system interpreted as missile launches. In other words, the technology had done exactly what it was programmed to do with the visual signals, but it lacked the context and the understanding of what it was actually observing. The computer processed data perfectly. It just didn't understand the reality in which it processed. And that difference almost changed everything in history. And this is where the story stops being just the Cold War and starts becoming something much more familiar. Petrov did not act irrationally, and he didn't gamble, and he didn't just follow his gut. He used what psychologists today would describe as expert intuition, which sounds like mystical and shit, but really what that means is he allowed the brain to recognize patterns faster than the conscious reasoning could explain them. So his training allowed him to notice inconsistencies before he could even fully articulate why or what they were. The computer had certainty, but Petrov had judgment, and judgment requires something systems struggle with, and that's the ability to tolerate uncertainty without immediately reacting to it. I don't think he was choosing instinct over logic. He was allowing logic, his own experience, his training, and uncertainty all to exist at the same time, which is actually incredibly difficult for humans to do, especially under extreme pressure like that. Now, you would think preventing a potential nuclear war would lead to medals, promotions, the good life, right? Maybe at least a thank you. It did not. Instead, Petrov was criticized for procedural errors in how he documented the incident, and his decision had exposed flaws in a very expensive military system, and acknowledging that publicly wasn't exactly convenient for Russian leadership. The event was classified, he was reassigned, and eventually he retired quietly, living most of his life without any kind of public recognition, and for the majority of it in poverty. When journalists tracked him down years later, they called him a hero, but he famously brushed it off and said he was simply doing his job, which somehow makes the story feel even heavier to me, because history tends to celebrate dramatic victories, but rarely does it acknowledge disasters that never happened, but could have. The world didn't learn about this incident until the 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapsed and former officials began revealing previously classified events and documents. And when people finally heard the story, it forced a mass realization of sorts. Global stability hadn't depended entirely on advanced technology or perfect strategy. It had depended on one person being willing to pause long enough to question certainty. So let's go back to the question that we started with. What do you do when something doesn't feel right, even when everything around you and everyone around you insists that it is? Stanislav Petrov didn't save the world because he was fearless, and he didn't save it because he ignored the rules. He saved it because he understood something. The systems could be confident and still be wrong. Maybe the lesson isn't simply to trust your gut. Maybe it's to develop the kind of judgment that allows you to recognize when certainty itself becomes dangerous and trust on technology goes too far. Because sometimes history doesn't change through grand decisions or powerful leaders. Sometimes it changes because one person stops, thinks, and decides to not act quickly. And sometimes that pause is just enough to let humanity continue. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please hit that like button. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of the video, and if anybody else deserves a chance in the spotlight. The Lumen Crew drop for the week, by the way, is going to be Command Petrov, in case I forgot to say that. And if you guys want to keep in touch, the information is down below in the bio. I do live streams on TikTok every Tuesday of the videos that I post on Monday. So we all get to talk and pitch in our thoughts on a certain subject. So I hope to see some of you there. If not, no, I'm just kidding. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. Thank you guys for stopping by. Peace and love, turtle doves.